Dear souls, today I have produced a very special video for you. The following information will completely turn your entire worldview upside down in just a few minutes. We expose a global indoctrination that has been occurring for millennia. 2001, a power and force that is responsible for much suffering on this earth. It is about a movement that has been falsifying history to its advantage for millennia, justifying displacement, genocide, and bloodshed, for which there is no basis. Half the world has been deceived, and still echoes slogans today, unaware of the demonic activities behind them. We correct history, so join me now on a fascinating shared journey together. We will reveal to you who really gave Palestine its name and significantly influenced its culture. I will prove to you in a few statements that Moses, Noah, David and Solomon, Abraham, Isaac and Rebekah never followed the bloodthirsty war and storm God Yahweh from the Old Testament, on which an entire world religion is based. They were not who they are believed to be. History has been stolen from these holy souls, wise protagonists, to forcefully impose prophecies and fabricated stories with violence and blood. That, on one hand, we will also reveal to you, Usand, that there was never any persecution or exodus from Egypt. In my discussions in the books Moses, The Way of Truth, and Noah, Son of an Anunnaki, I delve very intensively into these theses and also prove them conclusively. We will also reveal to you, this will be interesting now, where the Greek alphabet really comes from. The discussions today can trigger something very special. The Aegean. You can still see it today in Greece. Okay, correct. Where does the term come from? Where does the design of this name originally come from? Where does the term Aegean come from? It is located today around Greece in the Mediterranean. And in 1200 BC, after the defeat at Medinet Habu, and shortly before, the ancient Celts settled almost completely in Greece, and this is also documented. Egypt, this is interesting, was a Germanic god from Norse mythology. He was a giant, and the name comes from the old Germanic word for water, as his hometown was the Danish island of Læsø. There is also nothing substantial about Herod, for example. Herod means hero in German. That is a designation, not a name. Now it gets really exciting because, pay attention, the Egyptian Herod is also called Hero Herod. Herod, written down thousands of years earlier, tried to murder the Horus child. Well, Herod tried the same. And according to the Gospel of Luke 22, Quirinius was governor at that time, when the census took place. Not Herod. No Herod was seen. Herod is said to have died 4 years before Christ, which is why people like to set Jesus' birth date exactly to this date. They arrange everything accordingly. And according to Matthew 2, Jesus was born during the time of Herod? The information is contradictory, and according to the Scottish theologian Frederick P., one of the most influential New Testament scholars in British theology of the 20th. In the 1st century, Quirinius was already governor of Syria 7 years before Christ, not starting from 6 AD. And according to his statements, this is supposed to be historically proven. Contradiction upon contradiction. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish Hellenistic historian who many say never lived, but that is another topic, is considered the most important source of antiquity on the history of Judea, 2021. Okay. However, he does not mention a census in a single word, which would certainly have been noted, as it was something very extraordinary at that time. He was the only one to describe the surroundings of Judea very accurately during the time of the New Testament. And there I found the following text. Pay attention. For the Christian reader, Josephus set the stage with descriptions of the paradisiacal Galilee and the Sea of Galilee. For the ministry of Jesus, he set the stage, okay. For the history of Jesus' ministry in Galilee, the stage, a playhouse, a theater, my dear ones. Most of the events actually took place quite elsewhere. Flavius Josephus, once again, was a Jewish scholar who tried to preserve, defend, and uphold a dogma. But he himself wrote nothing about the census. It doesn't fit. Again, Herod means nothing other than hero. Was he called that? No. Countless rulers of that time turned the name Herod. In my book about Jesus and the book of Thomas, I explain this in detail, also with photographic evidence. There is basically real confusion among historians. Some say he had 4 wives, some say he had 7 wives, others speak of 10 wives. Also, that he had all the children under 2 years old killed in Bethlehem to track down Jesus. People, this is not historically documented. There is no record of it. There would be if such an event took place. The fact is that Josephus hated Herod, and yet he writes nothing about these infanticides. And it is described in the Bible in only one single gospel, in Matthew 2:16. That's it. Only one source, a single piece of evidence, which is also only hypothetical. He wrote that, and furthermore, when looking at many images of the palace and the landscape at Herod's, it becomes quite obvious that one seems to be completely unsure about the true location. You always see differently designed rooms, buildings, environments. If King Herod's palace had been located where it has been placed, in a locality that was later called Herodian, then certainly all painters would have oriented themselves to this building and its surroundings. And under Herod, John the Baptist is said to have been beheaded. Okay. Horus, my dear ones, was baptized by Anub the Baptist, who was later beheaded. Oh, look at that. We have the same story with John the Baptist, just much later. Do we see the parallels now? Did Herod really exist? And if so, under what name? In my book, Jesus Brothers, I will reveal it to you. That he is said to have lived in Herodian is, in my view, more of a claim, and should be regarded as such. Is the story of Herod and Jesus simply stolen from the Egyptians? So not from the Egyptians, but from the Egyptian traditions, which are indeed older. After all, in the older Egyptian writings, Herod pursued the Horus child. But to be honest, who would have suspected back then that it would one day come to light today? Who would have thought that there would one day be books for everyone, that there would one day be the internet, digitalization. That was quite an intense excursion again, but it is really meant to open our minds. And we return to this Tifinagh script, my dear ones, or also called Tifinagh. This is so crazy. First, I want to show you a comparison between the Greek alphabet and the Tifinagh script. So, be amazed. Sharing the screen. Pam. I know, it is indeed crazy, right? Just take a moment. Look at it calmly. My dear ones, the characters are not only similar, they are really almost identical. With very few characters, we find small changes. It's the tooth of time. This happens with all scripts, but it is almost identical. You can pause the video again and take a closer look. But isn't that phenomenal? Have we just revealed a historical fact? That is incredible. And many of these characters, now it gets exciting. We actually find again in the great corpus of the old Nordic runes. So where does the Greek alphabet come from? I ask now. Was the Greek alphabet first or the Tifinagh? Well, that was more of a rhetorical question. It's easy to answer, so pay attention. In Swedish Bohuslän, we find Bronze Age characters carved into stone. I have a book about it from the antiquarian. Beautiful, with fold-out pictures that are glued over 10 pages, and you can see all these rock carvings. It is truly a brilliant book, and it's hard to come by, but it really opens the mind. And this was about the Tifinagh script. It is an ancient Nordic script that was brought to the Mediterranean during the migrations and conquests. Just like iron smelting existed among the Celts as early as 4000 BC. And yet, it is said that it was invented in the Mediterranean 1200 BC, almost the same date. That was the date when the Iron Age begins. Celts go to the Mediterranean and bring their knowledge with them, including iron smelting. And this was confirmed by the English professor of zoology at the Harvard Museum of Comparative Zoology, namely Barry Fell. His works on epigraphy are legendary worldwide, my dear. He is not a conspiracy theorist. He wrote books and treatises on petroglyphs from Polynesia, America, and around the world. He lived for some time with the Tuaregs, which was crucial. That is, the present-day Berbers in Algeria and Morocco. And he knew the Tifinagh script all too well, as it is still used there. And when he arrived in Sweden, he could actually read and translate this rock carving quite easily, for the first time. Such rock carvings are also found in Peterborough, Canada. In Canada, Posidonius lived from 130 to 50 BC, and he expressed in 2001 that the Hellenes are identical to the Cimmerians, the Cimbri. Yes, who are they? From the Cimbric Peninsula. What is the Cimbric Peninsula? It includes the northern part of Germany and Denmark. The historian Strabo indeed explained it in the same way. And during their emigration, they eventually even reached India. And there they also found a new home. They are said to have been the ones who brought Vedic knowledge to the Indians. And thus we can be very grateful to the Indians today for having preserved the ancient Nordic knowledge and kept it for future generations. In Europe, everything has been done to destroy the history. And thus it would logically follow that Hinduism also comes from Atlantis. And thus it would also be clear that not only the Greek alphabet originates from the north of Europe, 2001, The name of the Hellenes also comes from the far north. What was the name of one of the most important gods of Nordic theology and the pantheon? The goddess Hel, from which terms such as Heil, Hel, Heilig, Helgoland, Helsinki were derived. Herodotus, dear ones, reported that there was a temple of Heracles in Tyre, and that Heracles was an ancient Dora. A Dora? Yes, we were the Dora. So, I'm rolling out quite a bit now. You notice I'm compressing a lot. Feel free to watch the video twice. The historians never seem to really agree on that. 1000. Let us now consider the following. The Dora on the Peloponnesian Peninsula was called the Spartans back then. Basic shield, like the Celts to the north, otherwise it was not known in the Mediterranean. Rossabishal, short sword. The ger, the spear. It is described that there was a so-called Doric migration, 1000. This is historically verified, and it should. When was it? When was it? As always, yes, again, 1200 BC. Look here, look closely. And we know the ancient northern peoples set out for Greece at exactly that time and also occupied Sparta. Point. There is nothing to add to that, and the Spartans carried the typical weapons of the ancient Celts and Germans, round shield grip tongues, sword spear. So the garrison had a comb made of horsehair, and it was on top of the helmet. And Herodotus even describes 2 columns of this temple, those in front of King Solomon's temple. And these are still called Doric columns today. Therefore, you might still know the term from school. When Herodotus spoke with the priests around 400 BC, they stated that this temple had been standing for 2300 years. This would mean it was built around 2700 BC. And Tacitus, if he indeed lived, also mentions that he equates Heracles with the northern gate. Besides the Doric columns, there are also the Ionic columns. Dor and Io come from the same family, of Helen. Helen. The Ionic columns resemble the ancient Celts even more, because what were the main symbols of the ancient Celts? Spiral and double spiral. So when you look at the picture, a light goes on for us again. Quick, take a look at the Doric and Ionic columns. Okay, here we have the very normal Celtic double spiral. Yes, the Dorians, also called Doria, were a people from the north who emigrated and settled in Greece, including Sparta. And the Ionians arrived at the same time, around 1000 to 1100 BC, as they came to the Mediterranean. And the date, as mentioned, is no coincidence. It precisely coincides with the time of the emigration wave of the North Sea peoples and the Battle of Medinet Habu, as well as the fall of Troy, of which there were 7, by the way. However, they were probably there much, much earlier in terms of timing. The Great Wave, however, only came at that time. And the Ionians, as mentioned, are considered the main bearers of today's Greek culture. And the Ionians refer to their ancestor Ion. In the story of Ion, told by Euripides from the 5th century BC, Ion is the son of Zeuthus. He was a fair-skinned, pale figure with light skin and blonde hair. Ion and Doris both descend from Helen, the ancestor of the Greeks, and thus the Dorians and the Ionians were related. But Ion was a direct son of Helen, while he was only a grandson, and that is why the Ionians considered themselves superior. Like the politician and statesman, the famous Solon. Solon also emphasized the story of Plato, saying that the Athenians were Ionians, and therefore had a higher status. But the blonde-haired Zeuthus was known to be just an immigrant in Athens. And Homer tells us that Menelaus and Agamemnon, who defeated Troy, descend from the ancestor of the Danai, named Danaus, Danai. The people, as mentioned, also reappears later among the Israelites in the Old Testament. It concerns the Danai. Again, a reference to the Cimbrian Peninsula, dear ones, which today separates the north from the Baltic Sea. It continues, but we are almost done. Gigantia, dear ones, is said to have been located off the African coast. I'm just providing hints now, okay? So, Usand is said to have been located off the coast, African coast, on the African continent, and traces back to the god Poseidon. But Poseidon ruled over the giant forge, the Cyclopes, demigods of mysterious origin, let's put it that way. And in Homer's Odyssey, it says that the sons of Poseidon are called there. One speaks of the island of Malta, but some also of the Azores, 2001. Personally, I find the Azores more likely, but more on that another time. Poseidon ruled over Atlantis, okay. The Berbers, the descendants of Atlantic emigrants, still translate the root word Atel with water today. Okay. Atlantis. Okay. Atlantis. ATL, the water, and Antes, as Antes sank. Atlantis was reborn as Antes, the Andes. Just by the way, I am currently researching this because they were actually called Antis, yes, in the past, and not An, as that is a modern form. Very exciting. Yes, of course, the ancient Atlanteans, after their land was destroyed, spread out in all directions, my dear. And they also built ancient Peruvian structures. Yes. Tiwanaku, Machu Picchu, Pisac, Alon Tatambo. And we also find the term later, for example, in Han, and King Attila again was, for example, also even then a nickname for the god Thor, Lord God, whom the Greeks called Heracles, right? And the Vikings referred to ancient former sunken land. Likewise, Adli. We also find the name repeatedly in South America. Well, let's now take up a claim of the Persians once again to conclude. I promised you at the beginning that it could be about the Berbers and the descendants of Noah. What is there to it? In the Book of Enoch, as well as in the Sumerian cuneiform texts, we know that Noah is described as having white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Nothing to do with racism, please. It is simply about citing the traditions that we can read. Okay, for me, this is not important, but it creates clarity, purity, and truth. And that is what matters. And at least it is important to bring light to this now. That's just how it is described. He cannot be the ancestor of people with temples and curls. Furthermore, our research has shown that Yahweh was first mentioned around 1000 BC, and that the belief really spread more widely. Only after the Babylonian liberation by Cyrus II. Yes, but Moses lived around 1200 BC, so earlier. Abraham also lived earlier. We know that Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti knew each other. They were present in the 13th and 14th centuries, not 2000 BC, as is claimed. I explain this in another book. Abraham descended from the Terahids. Terahids after Terach, one of his ancestors, and they settled Mitanni. They did not follow any Yahweh. They knew Aton just as well as Akhenaten and Fertiti. And the Terahids in Mitanni followed a moon and sun cult. My dear ones, Moses was Egyptian. And this white protagonist was imposed with a religion and a belief that no one ever followed. And this fact alone is already world-changing and revolutionary. So one must say that much needs to be put to the test. The ancient Celts, my dear ones, the northern tribes, experienced a great natural disaster around 1200 BC, which brought the whole world into upheaval, and the Greeks were almost completely destroyed. The northern peoples took their knowledge of iron smelting, which they already knew around 4000 BC, with them, and brought it to the Mediterranean. Thus began the famous Iron Age around 1200 BC. They conquered Greece, moved towards Egypt, where they lost and dispersed in the east and west of Egypt to settle there. They brought their knowledge, their wisdom, and their gods with them, causing a great cultural upheaval in North Africa and the Near East. And now I have to ask you a few important questions to conclude. What? Now it's whistling very loudly in my ear again. What has this little contribution done to you? What has it triggered in you? How has it significantly changed your worldview in less than an hour? How do you now view the worldview of the current religions that claim sole authority, occupy foreign lands, and oppress peoples? What do you think about their plans to enforce their questionable and biblical prophecies with armed force? Is all of this guided by a benevolent God? God is good, and if it is not good, it is not God. God equals good, equal good. Dear ones, we have reached the end. I thank you for your attentive listening. Look, feel free to listen to it twice. And again, this is indeed about defaming someone, but highlighting others. It's simply about clarity. It's simply about truth and nothing else. Ultimately, borders in the world are just fictional anyway. And Mother Earth, Pachamama, and Father Sky, Pachakamak, provide us with this playing field to use, but not to own. And that is what it is about. It is about understanding between peoples. It is about healing. It is about the future. It is about the fact that the history of every individual here on earth, every plant, every animal, can also participate in the cosmic consciousness ascension. This history. But for that, it requires cleansing, processing, clarification. Again, I actually never repeat it often enough in purity, clarity, and truth, because then this step is possible. One cannot build a future on untruths and claims, and that is what it is about. Be blessed. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy the time. So be it. Ciao.